Breaking news. If Prigozhin were to die, he would be the latest Putin critic to meet an untimely end. Warning signs were present. Soon after Yevgeny Prigozhin's march on Russia 2 months ago, speculation began about his eventual fate. Some speculated that the Wagner chief would not make it through the aftermath of his failed insurrection. The mercenary leader's plane crashed 2 months after the failed mutiny, and he is presumed dead. Officially, the cause of the crash is unknown, and there is no evidence to suggest any involvement on the part of the Kremlin. The Russian government has opened a criminal probe. What is known is that the bombastic mercenary boss, once one of the most powerful oligarchs and a member of Putin's trusted inner circle, appears to have joined a growing list of high-profile Russians who have fallen from grace with the president and died under mysterious circumstances. After being expelled from Russia in 2005, prominent Putin critic Bill Browder posted on X, formerly Twitter, that Putin never forgives and never forgets. Some of those who dared to challenge the Kremlin met a variety of tragic ends, including accidental falls from windows, hangings, poisonings, and health problems. A deputy prime minister in the late 1990s under President Boris Yeltsin, Kremlin critic Boris Nemtsov was shot dead in central Moscow in February 2015. He was a prominent member of the liberal opposition Republican Party of Russia, Party of People's Freedom, and had been arrested multiple times for criticizing Putin's rule. Ilya Yashin, leader of the opposition, said after his death that his friend had been writing a report about the involvement of Russian troops in Ukraine. Just hours before his death, in an interview with Newsweek magazine, Nemtsov warned that Russia was drowning under Putin's leadership and was quickly becoming a fascist state. A country with unrivaled potential is sinking under Vladimir Putin's policy, he said, and an economy that has amassed unimaginable currency reserves is collapsing. 2 days before he was scheduled to lead an opposition rally in the Russian capital, Nemtsov was killed. The place where he was killed was visible from the Kremlin. 5 Chechen men were given lengthy sentences in 2017 for their roles in his murder. Many of Nemtsov's backers blamed Putin's government for the assassination. Once a powerful figure in Russian business, Boris Berezovsky fell out of favor with the Kremlin and eventually made his way to England. After the Soviet Union's fall, he left his job as a math professor and systems analyst in Moscow to pursue more lucrative ventures, which is how he amassed his fortune. While the sale of high-end automobiles contributed significantly to his wealth and power, he really took off after he began investing in Russian news outlets. After falling out of favor with his government, he fled to Britain, where he continued his campaign of opposition to Putin and even called for a coup to remove the Russian president from office. A Russian court found Berezovsky guilty of fraud and tax evasion in his absence in 2007. He also stated that Russia was behind an attempt on his life. Berezovsky's body, with a noose around his neck, was discovered on the bathroom floor of his UK home in 2013. At the time, British authorities said there were no indications of a struggle, leading them to believe the oligarch had committed suicide. Alexander Perepilichny was a businessman who allegedly provided proof of fraud to Russian tax authorities. In 2012, at the age of 44, he passed away unexpectedly while jogging back to his Surrey, southwest London, home. At first, it seemed like the whistleblower had simply passed away. A coroner's court heard in 2015 that his stomach contained traces of gelsemium, a rare plant poison, according to plant toxicology experts from the Royal Botanic Gardens in Kew. 2 years after his death, it was speculated that he may have been poisoned by eating sorrel soup, a popular Russian dish. There was no evidence of poisoning, police said later. Perepilichny was working on a case to expose a Russian money laundering operation when he was killed. Sergei Magnitsky, a prominent Russian lawyer, was found dead in a Russian prison in 2009. Helping uncover a $230 million tax fraud and evidence that Russian government officials were involved in carrying it out and then covering it up while working for American-born financier Bill Browder's Hermitage Capital. Magnitsky was arrested on unrelated tax fraud charges shortly after making those disclosures public in 2008. A year later, he passed away while awaiting trial. A report by the Russian Presidential Human Rights Commission found evidence that he had been beaten on the day he died, contradicting the claims of his family that life-saving medical care had been withheld. According to official Russian accounts, Magnitsky died of heart failure. Browder began a public campaign for justice in the United States, urging lawmakers to pass legislation penalizing Russians suspected in Magnitsky's death and other human rights abuses. In 2012, lawmakers enacted the Magnitsky Act. Moscow apparently retaliated against the Magnitsky Act 2 weeks after its passage by banning American adoptions of Russian children. The two restrictions are still in effect. Former Russian agent and Kremlin critic Alexander Litvinenko was poisoned in a London hotel bar in 2006 by two Russian agents who laced his green tea with the highly radioactive polonium-210, according to a British investigation. Litvinenko, who suffered a slow and painful death in the weeks after his poisoning, maintained throughout his life that Putin and the Kremlin were to blame for his ordeal. On his deathbed, he said, "You may succeed in silencing one man, but the howl of protest from around the world will reverberate in your ears, Mr. Putin, for the rest of your life." Putin probably approved of the ex-spy's killing, according to the investigation led by Judge Robert Owen. The Russian government has consistently denied responsibility for the poisoning and has thus far refused to extradite two agents to Britain. Previously employed by the KGB, Litvinenko had moved on to work for Russia's Federal Security Service, FSB. After the fall of the Soviet Union, his final position at the agency was leading its anti-corruption department, a role that earned him many detractors due to his focus on combating organized crime. Litvinenko, after leaving the FSB, blamed his former employers for a series of apartment bombings in Russia in 1999 that killed hundreds and prompted Russia's invasion of Chechnya. Marina Litvinenko, his widow, claims he began working for British security services after moving there as a whistleblower in the year 2000. Her assassination in the foyer of her Moscow apartment building in October 2006 came after she had been a vocal opponent of Russia's war in Chechnya. In 2014, a court in Moscow ruled that 5 men were responsible for the murder. The Moscow City Court stated that an unnamed man asked Lam Ali Gaidakayev, the man the jury found to be the mastermind of the killing, to murder Anna Politovskaya for the sum of $150,000 because of her reporting on human rights violations and other issues. According to the New York-based Committee to Protect Journalists, she received death threats after reporting on human rights violations in Chechnya, which infuriated the Russian government. Putin stated shortly after her death that Politovskaya's death in itself is more damaging to the current authorities both in Russia and the Chechen Republic than her activities, implying that the Kremlin had nothing to do with her murder. Unusual causes of death such as drownings, suicides, etc. There is enough potential Kremlin victims among the recently deceased to fill a book. RIA Novosti reported the death of a former general in the Russian security services on the same day that Prigozhin was thought to have been murdered. Convicted of bribery offenses in 2017, General Gennady Loprev, who was said to be familiar with the building of Putin's Black Sea residence, had been serving a sentence of 9 years and 8 months. RIA Novosti reports that on August 16 he suddenly fell ill, while in custody and later died at a hospital. Loprev had always insisted that he was blameless. An insider source claimed that Loprev was the keeper of secrets regarding the building of Putin's residence in Gelendzhik, also known as Putin's Palace, according to the Institute for the Study of War, a think tank based in Washington, D.C. The Russian Ministry of Education and Science reported in May that Pyotr Kucharenko, 46, had died on the way back from a visit to Cuba. 6 executives from Russia's 2 largest energy companies, Gazprom and Lukoil, are among the at least 13 prominent Russian businessmen whose deaths have been attributed to suicide or unexplained circumstances in the past year. The latter made a rare public statement last year calling for an end to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. According to the Indian police, Pavel Antov, a former Russian sausage magnate turned lawmaker, died in a December fall from the third floor of his hotel. The police say that on Antov's 65th birthday, his traveling companion Vladimir Budanov died of a heart attack. The police said Antov committed suicide, and that Budanov, who was 61, had a history of heart problems. According to Reuters, the official cause of death for Alexander Buzikov, the head of a major Russian shipyard that specializes in building non-nuclear submarines, was a sudden heart attack in December. Once the head of Moscow State University, Anatoly Gerashenko,